Then one night it came to him. In the one-room adobe house on Tabernacle Street, he awoke in the darkness with not only the tune, but a set of words swirling in his head.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a weekly podcast sharing the stories of a place known as Utah's Dixie, and brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation. Through stories as universal as they are personal, this podcast is dedicated to the memory of legendary family physician Dr. Craig Booth, and to defining, preserving, and perpetuating the spirit of Dixie embodied in his life and work.
Hi, I'm Lyman, host of the Not Forgotten podcast. For more than 40 years, I've been writing and publishing with the intent of connecting landscape and story in the American Southwest. I believe the words spoken by a character in a story by Barry Lopez. Everything is held together by stories, he said. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. Dr. Craig Booth was a man of stories and compassion. His personal story is one of the many that have made Utah's Dixie what it is, and his compassion is at the heart of that elusive entity we call the Dixie Spirit. In the early 1960s, there was always an evening in mid-December when Dad would load us in the car and drive us into a magical night. My siblings and I did not go gentle into that good night. Wide-eyed and full of joy, we could not contain ourselves. The fact that Christmas was just around the corner was at the heart of it. But even more, during the course of that drive, we knew we would witness a dazzling array of lights, the likes of which our little heads could hardly contain. For me, Christmas has always been synonymous with light. The further you got up Flood Street from our southern edge of town, the brighter and more thrilling the lights became. At Merv Reber's house on the corner of Tabernacle Street, we witnessed what seemed to us the most spectacular flood of white lights ever staged on this planet. As we turned onto Highway 91, now known as the Boulevard, we'd drive beneath the gloriously strung lights that canopied the street and cry out with glee as we passed under the red plastic bells that lit up synchronistically 1, 2, 3 above us. From there, we drove up Diagonal Street and then onto the Red Hill and down Hope Street, where homes were covered with lights and illuminated with reindeer and sleighs and every imaginable image of the season. As we dropped off the hill and back down into the heart of town, we turned again onto Tabernacle Street and approached the house where my dad grew up and where my grandparents still lived, and stopped in to say hi. Then we headed home, eastward down Tabernacle Street. By the time Dad pulled the old Ford back into the carport beneath our own modest but wonderful display of lights, we were so full of light that Mom must have seen us glowing through the blankets when she tucked us in our beds. On those December night rides, Dad would tell us stories related to the places along the way. But there was one story tied to that route that I did not hear for the first time until I was an adult. It was shared with me by my dear friend Mary Phoenix, who had been my fourth grade teacher at East Elementary and my English teacher at Dixie High School. It's a story many old-timers knew, but one that every resident of southern Utah should know. It is one of our community's most sacred connections to the season. It occurred on a cold winter's night in a humble little adobe house at what became 294 East Tabernacle, now home of Cache Valley Bank. The year was 1869. just 8 winters since the original company of Latter-day Saint settlers arrived in the St. George Valley. Those who had remained were barely surviving in this desolate corner of the territory. The town's ecclesiastical leader, Erastus Snow, was looking for a way to lift the people out of the tedium of hunger and dreary gray days of winter. He began to plan a holiday celebration, something for the townsfolk to look forward to, something to brighten their spirits and lighten their loads. There wasn't a lot of food, but there was plenty of musical talent in the valley, enough to stage the kind of program that might carry their spirits through to spring. Elder Snow called 2 of the town's leading creative lights to his office, Poet Laureate Charles Walker and choir master John M. Macfarlane. The 2 had collaborated on a number of compositions, Walker writing the words and Macfarlane the music. Now their charge was to write something special for the upcoming Christmas celebration. Walker went right to work and composed several verses, which he passed along to Macfarlane. As the day of the event drew seriously near, John Macfarlane found himself stumped. As wonderful as Walker's verses were, he could not put them to music. Then one night it came to him. In the one-room adobe house on Tabernacle Street, he awoke in the darkness with not only the tune, but a set of words swirling in his head. Macfarlane was a large and handsome man. His wife, Anne Chatterley, was a fine and diminutive woman, barely 5 feet tall and less than 100 pounds. John rousted her out of bed and asked her to light the lamp and start pumping the bellows on the organ. The 2 of them, in their robes and nightcaps, shivered against the night as music permeated the chill air of their home and began to warm their hearts. John played and wrote and hummed as Anne held the lamp in one hand and pumped the bellows with the other. Not until the first rays of morning broke through the frost-glazed window did John M. Macfarlane declare it finished. After breakfast, he hustled down Tabernacle Street to show his work to Brother Walker. Charles Walker was the first to declare its excellence. Macfarlane signed both their names to the finished copy, but Walker modestly insisted his name be removed. He later stated there wasn't a word in the song that was his. In fact, neither man was all that concerned about taking credit. Like much of their other work, they assumed it would be performed once, then fade away. But this song would never fade away. Far, far away on Judea's plains was performed to the delight of everyone at St. George's Christmas program that year, and repeated by popular demand the next year and the year after that. As Christmases came and went, the carol spread throughout the territory, and in 1889, 20 years after it was composed in those cold night hours on Tabernacle Street, it was published in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Juvenile Instructor magazine. By 1896, it had officially made its way into the LDS hymn book. Now the song belongs to Christian people everywhere who sing its simply profound words and heartwarming tune from the depths of their souls every Christmas. Year after year they sing it because it expresses so perfectly their feelings for the most holy of all days. On our family Christmas light tour each year, we always drove down Tabernacle Street and passed the very place where John and Anne Macfarlane huddled around the old bellows organ in the golden lamplight that night. The very place where 100 years earlier they first brought forth the strains of what would become a classic Christmas carol. It would have been a night just like those mid-December nights we rode through. And as amazing as all those lit-up homes were, I cannot imagine their brightness coming close to eclipsing the glorious golden glow that shone in the window of that humble little adobe house at 294 East Tabernacle. How many people can say that a classic Christmas carol was written in their little hometown, a song that was written more than 150 years ago that is still sung and still enjoyed, and that still inspires at Christmas time? And when I drive past that spot on Tabernacle Street, I've already expressed many times in this podcast that I'm haunted by a place, and that's one of those places where when I drive past it, I just imagine John Menzies Macfarlane and his wife Anne in that little adobe house in the night, composing this absolutely wonderful Christmas carol. I haven't known a lot about John Menzies Macfarlane, but the little bit that I do know, and I do know many of his posterity because he had many, many children. He was actually one of the original polygamist brethren in St. George, and Anne was his first wife, and she was his wife at the time that this was written, but he married two other great women as well. And between the three, they had, I haven't stopped to count, but it's more than 20 children. But John Macfarlane is so amazing. He was born in Scotland, and he, as a boy, and his mother heard the missionaries and accepted the restored gospel of Jesus Christ and joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and eventually came to America. And he and his mother were part of or I'm not sure where his mother was at this time or how long she actually lived, but he was part of the original Perpetual Immigration Fund that brought people from overseas and then across the country to Salt Lake City. And then he came down to Cedar City, and he began to utilize all of his amazing talents and skills and knowledge. He was an attorney, he was a judge, he was a surveyor, he was a school teacher, he was many things, but I think first and foremost, he was a musician and a beloved musician, and he could play many instruments. And he became the choir master in Cedar City in the 1850s. This is so early on, and from what I've read, they didn't really have many instruments. He would do choir practice with a tuning fork, and that was about all they had. But he was a master at training choirs and creating beautiful music for these very small communities. He went to Tokerville. He was sent to Tokerville to help out there. He was the postmaster there, one more thing that he did. And while at Tokerville, he actually, through his legal and experience and as a judge, he was asked to, when the folks came to St. George in 1861, and the folks in Santa Clara who had already been there, and then the Swiss who came as well to Santa Clara in 1861, there were water disputes on the Santa Clara Creek as to who should have water and what those water rights would be. And John Macfarlane was asked to come and mediate those water disputes. So you can see what an amazing person he was. And yet, what we remember him for and what we're coming back to here today is the fact that he wrote that amazingly wonderful Christmas carol. The story is, as I shared it, it's interesting because Charles Walker, who became the poet laureate of Utah's Dixie, he wrote so many wonderful verses and poems, and Charles and John Macfarlane, they collaborated on several things. The most notable is the hymn, "Dearest Children, God is Near Thee." I think I got that title right, in which Charles Walker wrote the lyrics and John Macfarlane wrote the music. And that is a beloved hymn in the Latter-day Saint hymn book that we still sing today. But as it relates to the story of Far, Far Away, that process was different. It wasn't a matter of you write the words, I'll write the music, and we'll come up with a song. Erastus Snow had come to both of them, Erastus being the leader, the ecclesiastical leader in the community at that time. This is just a few years after they've arrived in St. George, and they want to celebrate Christmas in a special way. And so he asks them to create a song for that celebration. And Charles Walker wrote lyrics. John Macfarlane took those lyrics but couldn't quite make it work. And then one night, as the story goes, he and his wife got up in the night and composed not only the music but the lyrics to this beloved Christmas carol. And I think about Charles Walker and the fact that he put all that effort into writing lyrics, but they didn't end up in the song. But he was humble enough and gracious enough to realize that and to accept that. And so John Macfarlane becomes the composer, both of music and the lyrics, for this wonderful song. I'm really happy today to be here in the studio with Ricky Valadez. And Ricky is the producer of this podcast, but Ricky is multi-talented in so many ways. He's a composer, arranger, scorer, film scorer, and has done a great deal of work in his young career to create music and to bring music and imagery together in wonderful ways. And the work that he's doing on this podcast is also so wonderful. But I wanted to visit with Ricky today about this Christmas carol and about the creative process, maybe in general. But Ricky, when you imagine John Macfarlane in his little adobe house in St. George 150 years ago, he's been given this charge by his church leader to create something within a specific amount of time that will help lift the spirits of the folks in the community. Just share your thoughts about that kind of assignment.
Yeah, I've had maybe somewhat similar experiences when you're tasked to create something that's supposed to be uplifting and inspiring, and you have a deadline. As you pointed out in the story, I do kind of see the glow in the house as John and Anne are up working all night. It's hard to know exactly what it would be like for him this particular occasion, but from experiences that I've had, I mean, being woken up in the middle of the night is not the typical flow for creativity for me, and I suspect for a lot of people, but occasionally you feel the stirring, and it's almost like a vision is planted in your heart about what the end result is going to be, and once that gets planted, you can't let it go till you create it. I like to think of it kind of like a sculpture. When I feel like I get that vision planted in my heart, it's like there's a big stone and I can see the sculpture inside the stone, but then you just work at it, at least for me. It doesn't come immediately, the words or the melody or any of it. It's usually just, I know there's a feeling, I get a sense of what it's supposed to be, and then I can't stop digging or carving away at the stone until you maybe hit something that feels just right, and then you start working on the other side. So that's just kind of what I assume would be the experience for him, just because of the fact that he was up at night and kind of couldn't stop. One other thing that I really love about the story is Anne's contribution. That's just so awesome to see that maybe she was feeling that same spirit also. Even though he was the one that had the musical training that would enable him to create that music, maybe that same spirit rested on both of them that inspired and motivated her to work through the night and just be that supportive role, it's really special, I think, to see them. Imagine them working together like that.
That is just that image of them in the night. It is a wonderful collaboration. So, Ricky, as you considered this piece, what are the characteristics of it that stand out to you, and how did the creative process bring those characteristics together?
Yeah, so the way that he wrote the music for this, to me, when I look at the music as a musician, it tells me that he cared a lot about the message of those words. So, for example, with film scoring, when you're composing for a film, the primary thing is the story that's being told. And the score, most of the time, is not really supposed to distract from it. It's supposed to enhance and support it. And sometimes we composers like to get fancy and try to show off with the things that we create. But I think when we really care about the message or the story that we're sharing, then the music fits just right in a supportive way. And so I think that the music here is beautiful, and it's something that can exist for centuries because it's not overdone. It's harmonically, melodically fairly simple, but I think that that's because it's designed to bring out the message of the words. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of the music as it relates to the words.
I've always thought of this song, when I've thought about it, it really is, simple isn't the right word because that could have a negative connotation. It is not simple, but it is spare, and it is to the point. And there are 4 verses there, but there are just a few words in each verse, and every word counts, and every word is perfect. And the melody, as you said, is really, it's not a complex composition, and yet there's so much there that is, it's powerful. And I've always thought that that's a lot of times what makes something classic, is that it is there is so much more there than what is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with this one, maybe I should just read the lyrics.
Yeah.
I'll skip the chorus till the end. Far, far away on Judea's plain, shepherds of old heard the joyous strain. Second verse, sweet are these strains of redeeming love, message of mercy from heaven above. Lord, with the angels we too would rejoice. Help us to sing with the heart and voice. Hasten the time when from every clime men shall unite in the strain sublime. Glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. I mean, those words, they definitely have a spirit of taking you back, imagining that maybe you're one of those shepherds and then the heavens open and you get to taste what heaven is like, and that desire to be among them and eventually hasten the time when he does bring peace on earth and goodwill towards all men. You can just imagine that spirit of maybe what those shepherds felt sort of resting upon them in their home that night as he was contemplating the good news of the gospel, that good message. I love to think about these original pioneers in this valley, and we've talked in a previous podcast about how they came from so many diverse
places with different backgrounds and their way of speaking. I would just love to hear John Macfarlane's voice, because I'm sure it was a very distinct, thick Scottish brogue, and it probably was through all of his life. And I wonder, having studied music as you have, do you see anything Scottish or Scottish roots in any of this?
It does seem to have a little bit of a flavor of that, with the melody being somewhat pentatonic and then also slightly rhythmic. Those are some of the characteristics that I see as being maybe Scottish, or have some of that Celtic, Irish, Scottish folk sound to it, which I think is part of why it feels simple, but is also catchy. Those are the catchy melodies and phrases that we know are always sticking to those basic notes. But there also does, as I was listening to it, there does seem to be a little bit of a hint of that musical feeling you get in traditional Christmas melodies. So he seemed to tap into that a little bit too. And what makes a melody or harmony Christmas is a little bit hard to pinpoint. But to me, this one has a little bit of that.
That's great. In this podcast, we've been looking at how the unique aspects of Utah's Dixie and the Dixie spirit. I mean, it can be looked at as parochial or very provincial, very local, and yet so much that is universal has come out of this little place. With this song is such a great example of that. The writings of Juanita Brooks and Maureen Whipple and other people who grew up in the confines of this little place, but their work is known widely. Again, this is something that was written for a Christmas celebration in St. George, Utah in 1869, and is now sung widely among the Christian world around the world and recognized and appreciated. What you've already alluded to this, but what is it that makes it universal?
Well, I think probably the message is so pure with the lyrics. I think that's a really big part of it. That he didn't stray from just that real core common spirit that we feel, I think, when we try to immerse ourselves in the story of Christmas, the birth of Christ, and his first and his second advent, and what that means. So I think that's a major factor. But then the other, I think, is just that he, whether it was an intentional or whether it was more like just he kind of knew what it was supposed to feel like, which, as I described earlier, is the case with me. Oftentimes I know what it's supposed to feel like, but I don't know what the exact notes are until I kind of play around with it and figure it out. But whichever the case was for him, I guess because it took them all night, I would assume it'd be similar to how I usually work, which is you don't know, it doesn't come like you see the notes on the page, but I suspect he had that feeling, and trying to create the music that matched the feeling of those words just really solidifies its timelessness and its purity.
When I think about John Menzies Macfarlane, he came here from another land, and so he had seen the world, so to speak. He had come across the Atlantic Ocean and all the way across the United States or the North American continent, but he'd never been to the Holy Land. And I've never been to the Holy Land. I wish I could say I had. However, he's writing about this place, Judea, far, far away on Judea's plains. And I remember someone expressing once, and it didn't make any difference to me, and I don't think it makes any difference to anyone else because the song's so awesome. But they said, isn't Judea a mountainous place? And he's talking about Judea's plains. Well, it rhymes beautifully with strains, and that's special. However, I think what's most important is the spirit of the song, and that was the inspiration that he had at that time as he wrote it. And it really, in my mind, it fits together so beautifully and shares that message that you have talked about in such a focused, precise, beautiful way. It's very, very simple, but very, very profound. Again, John Menzies Macfarlane, he must have been such an amazing person to do all that he did. I mean, on a daily basis, he was involved in so many aspects. He was even a founder of the institution that eventually became Dixie College in the 1880s. And I can't imagine with his wives, with all of his children, with all of his responsibilities, and then Elder Snow coming to him and saying, "We need a song for Christmas." As a composer, because I know that you've had people come to you and say, "I need this next week."
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts come to my mind. For someone like that, I mean, he was so involved in other things other than music. For me, all I do is music all the time, mostly. But it's kind of refreshing to see how important music was for someone who was involved in so many other elements of the community, and that he took it seriously. And it's probably not really possible to measure the things we do in our life and how the kind of influence that they have, but surely this would be one of the things that he did that has maybe had the most influence, and he did it in about a night, you know?
And it's the reason we're talking about him today. And there's so many other aspects of his life that we could talk about in future podcasts. So much about Charles Walker that I know we're going to be talking about in future podcasts. There's the different dimensions of all the great people who came to this valley originally and brought their unique skills and talents and gifts that really did create a very special place. And when we talk about that Dixie spirit, that's what this is all about, is celebrating what all of that meant and how we in this generation are remembering all of that and taking it to heart and carrying it forward in our own work in a special way. And that's what you're doing, Ricky. And I would love, this is not this weekend, I would love to perhaps hear your interpretation or your arrangement of this hymn in 150 years later, knowing the story of the people, the person that wrote it, knowing the situation in which it was written, knowing the impact it had in a very difficult time long ago, and carrying that forward now through our own through your gifts and through your talent and your inspiration.
Yeah, one other thing that kind of strikes me about this story is the impact that the song has had versus the time of his life spent creating it. It just kind of reminds me that I guess we never really can expect when inspiration or guidance or nudgings might come to us that could be the thing that we're remembered for, whether we act on it or not. So that's, to me, another thing that's striking and kind of inspiring about this story, to realize that those moments come in our lives, and then we get to choose if we act and follow on that spirit, and who knows if it's going to be something that will impact a couple people close to us, or maybe even last centuries down the road.
That is really amazing to think about. Thanks, Ricky. It's been awesome to visit with you about this.
Far, far away on Judea's plains, shepherds of old heard the joyous strains. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Sweet are the strains of redeeming love, message of mercy from heaven above. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Lord, with the angels we too would rejoice. Help us to sing with our heart and voice. Hasten the time when from every clime men shall unite in the strain sublime. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace on earth, peace on earth, peace on earth, goodwill to men.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.